Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. The Federalist Papers. By Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. A collection of articles penned by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay is known as the Federalist Papers. Between October 1787 and August 1788, the writings were published in the New York Independent Journal. The Federalist, a two-volume compilation of all of them, was published in 1788. Federalist Papers was not renamed to the Federalist Papers until the 20th century, as a series of small portions known as the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are broken down into several parts, each with its own central theme. Parts 1 to 8 of this book provide background information on the various constitutional issues that will be discussed in greater depth in the following sections. Hamilton organized protesters into a few categories in anticipation of a strong reaction to the new constitution and dynamic resistance to it. There were others who were inherently resistant to any type of change. There were many who feared such a change would result in the loss of their jobs. There were many who found the opportunity to fish in turbulent waters exciting. A central form of governance and its consequences are clearly laid out in Hamilton's work. It is important to have a standing army, as well as equal and fair taxation for all states, according to him. He acknowledges that the country will be better protected if it is united against foreign forces, or countries. A splintered group is prone to infighting and will be easy prey for a conqueror. As he wraps up the argument, Hamilton focuses on the importance of safeguarding the rights of individuals, while ensuring the prosperity of the general population. Part 1, Essays 1 through 5. A new kind of government is proposed to readers at the start of the first article. He's well aware that this won't be met with universal acclaim. Protesters may be viewed as despots who despise freedom. He warns the reader to be on the lookout for those who might try to sway their thoughts in a way that isn't in accordance with reality. According to him, he intends to offer arguments in favor of the new constitution as well as clarify any concerns readers may have about how things are run in the country. It's worth noting that the Union's significance is being discussed. Some analysts believe that no single framework is capable of handling all 13 states. The only alternative is to dissolve the Union in order to receive this constitution. This is the first time in American history that the country has been successful primarily due to its shared environment. People in the United States are united by a common language and religion. This unity was crucial to the success of the Revolution, and it will continue to be crucial to the country's transition to a new government. The book then goes on to explain why national unity is the strongest defense against foreign dangers. Fewer wars will be fought because a united country can adhere to trade agreements and treaties more regularly. There will be no wars sparked by distinct actions from different countries. It's easier to negotiate and settle lesser problems amongst states when the country as a whole is united. Other countries and the global community will take it more seriously as a result. The newly formed United States and other nations, such as Spain, France, and England, were involved in a number of territorial conflicts during this time in history. There was apprehension that these disagreements may escalate into conflict. According to the author, the strongest defense against such a war would be a united government of the United States. A country that is split will not be able to build a strong army or navy and will be weakened as a result. Part 2, Essays 6 through 9. Independent states will eventually compete for total authority if there is no unifying government because of man's inherent desire for power. The nations will be engulfed in battles with competitors if commerce is divided between them, as it was in the times of Athens, Carthage, Holland, and Great Britain before them. With so many unrecognized regions in the western United States during this period, the country faced a serious threat from other countries waging war over land. Additional rivalry between governmental debt repayment programs and business policies would exacerbate the already existing divisions. They wouldn't be obligated to follow the laws of another state if they didn't have to. It's inevitable that this would lead to a costly system of interstate taxes. If some countries default on their European debt, it will have an impact on others and make things more difficult. Different states would have different approaches to debt repayment, and this would rise to disagreements about who should bear the bulk of the burden. States that feel threatened by their neighbors may be more prone to change their own constitutions in ways that could reduce civil rights protections. Critics of the Constitution have argued that the United States is too dispersed to be a stable nation. Larger states like New York, Virginia, and Massachusetts may be divided up into smaller ones, according to this line of thinking. As the term Confederate Republic suggests, this is a type of government in which several smaller states join together to form a single entity. In this way, the greater government's authority might be increased while remaining compact and focused. Combining two or more states without abolishing their individual governments results in a Confederate Republic. However, they would still have to submit to the authority of the larger system, in this case, the United States government, which holds absolute power. Part 3, Essays 10 through 17. According to the U.S. Constitution, there are numerous benefits to creating a union. Government costs will be reduced, and there will be less conflict between factions. Trade and riches will be handled more effectively. When a group of individuals join together for the purpose of violating the rights of others, they form a faction. It was said that a Republican style of governance would stand in opposition to this and offer a solution to dissolving divisions without restricting the right of the people together. Having a larger number of government delegates keeps tabs on the few who might form a group in a Republican government. In terms of commerce and trade, a union is a more effective means of promotion. In particular, when comparing the United States to Europe. A federal fleet, which could assist the United States in establishing commercial rights, would be possible under a union. The finest way to advance the abundance of the young country is through unification. The union's consistent business practices will have a positive impact on the economy of the entire country. A city's tax-paying capacity rises in tandem with its overall wealth, as do its inhabitants' ability to pay their fair share. States will be able to trade unlawfully and carry illegal goods if there is no union, which will have a negative impact on the national economy. With a single union, just the Atlantic side needs to be secured from exchange infringement. Taxes on commerce would be necessary in the absence of a national income. Because of this, landowners would soon become overburdened by the influx of people. All things considered, it is more cost-effective to administer a single, centralized government than 13 smaller ones. So many colonies necessitate a large number of government employees, who would all have to worry about interstate threats as well as outside ones. As long as the state administrations were still located in their respective states, the proposed constitution allowed for shared responsibilities. Before now, it was thought that Congress would be able to continue convening with representatives from each state. The major goal would be to maintain the 13-colony union and allow for the addition of new colonies as they arose. Despite the fact that transit between the states was becoming more efficient every day, each state remained a frontier in its own manner. As a result, people had good cause to turn to the federal government for assistance and security. As a result, the states farthest away from Washington had a greater incentive to support the Union since they were more concerned about external threats. Part 4, Essays 18 through 22. Because of infighting and rivalry among their members or the intrusions of other forces, many unions have come to an end. For example, the Greco-Roman Republic ended in a jumble of alliances and power struggles, laying the groundwork for Rome's eventual conquest. After 6 years of American union, there was a great possibility that something like this might happen again, which would allow England to take control of the United States once more. New laws were not approved by Congress since they didn't have the support of their constituents. A state's willingness to aid another in a moment of need was not guaranteed. No one in the government would be able to stop individual states from abusing the rights of their inhabitants. States were likewise subjected to different rates of taxes. To put it plainly, there was no way of determining the value of a state. This could have been the end of the Union as we know it. States that believed they were being unfairly taxed could have taken legal action against the Union if the federal government had started collecting taxes. Taxing the citizenry is the only method to assure a long-term source of money for the government. It wasn't just Congress that was having issues with trade. As a result of the states attempting to administer their own commercial policies, there were many contradictions. Many international agreements had already been harmed as a result of this. Part 5, Essays 23 through 29. When the body tasked with building a wall has the resources to do so, a responsible government will be able to provide for everyone's safety. In order to deal with normal opposition, an administration's energy cannot be limited. There is no way of knowing what future threats may arise. National security threats exist in all states, and an attack on one state's borders is an attack on all of them. In the case if each state had its own security force, New York would be particularly vulnerable. For one thing, the entire country is at risk if one state fails to adequately safeguard itself. It's possible that interstate competition and jealousy could lead every state to try to outdo the others militarily if one offers more than expected from that state. Rivalry between the state and national militaries is also possible. During times of calm, the Constitution's constitutional scholars raise concern about keeping armed forces in place. As representatives of the general public, the governing body has jurisdiction over the armed forces and hence cannot weaken the rights of the general public without the support of the general public. For one thing, the 2-year funding commitment by Congress means that members of the public, through their delegates, will be forced to vote on the military as many times a year as feasible. The young country needed a standing army because of the numerous threats to national security it faced. Small fortifications on the country's western border were critical. It's unclear who would be in charge of those troops. They needed an army on the borders of the country to secure it until the government built naval bases with ports and weapons storage. In addition, the government would have needed enough power to support a well-trained and uniformed state army of reasonable size. With this civilian army, the necessity for a standing military force will be greatly reduced because it may be deployed whenever necessary. Furthermore, because they would be indigenous, they could not harm other people's freedoms. Furthermore, the selection of volunteer army officers by each state should eliminate any thoughts that this group of men is infringing on the individual freedom of its citizens. It is guaranteed that a volunteer army from a neighboring state will come to the help of another state by having the surrounding local army under government control. Part 6, Essays 30-36. For the sake of national security, the authority of the government should be confined to the needs of the country and its resources. When it comes to determining how much money the government has available to spend, it must not be hindered by anything other than the power of the general populace spoken to by officials. There should be no limitations on the administration's ability to conduct assessments. The legislature has to know the entire extent of its resources before deciding whether or not it needs to take out loans. By doing so, a country is able to plan forward for its own existence and security. A nation that has complete control over its own resources is more likely to get loans from foreign powers than a nation that is vulnerable to 13 different decisions about the possibility and pace of repaying such advances. According to critics, the government should be responsible for all inward tax assessments, and all income obtained through trade should be given to the government. As a result, the federal government is relegated to a posture of deference to the states, and the federal government is forced to choose between being perpetually strapped for cash and perpetually dependent on the states. Aside from imports and fares, which are confined to the state's control, the current system of government included a simultaneous evaluation framework in which elected and state administrations both retained the right to impose. Part 7, Essays 37-40. Those who read the U.S. Constitution wanted to be sure that its authors were aware of its flaws and that no one expected it to be perfect. In the end, the convention had to deal with the problem of not having any solid coalitions to follow, only a slew of broken alliances that showed them what not to do. One of the most difficult challenges was balancing the powers of a zealous national government with a guarantee of individual liberties, as well as between small and large states. It's incredible that there was such broad agreement. There are two possible explanations for this: either the agents weren't separated by eternally various political groupings, or everybody understood the importance of bargaining in order to defend the Union. A Republican government was the only option for the United States because of its strong belief in self-governance at the time. To put it another way, an administration in a republic is one whose authority derives from the vast majority of the general population, and whose members are chosen by that majority. According to the suggested plan, elected and national governments would work together. It was federal because the convention met through representatives from the states, because the confirmation required the support of 9 states, because the Senate was made up of delegates from each state, and because each state retains its own power when joining the Union, and because of these reasons. At the time, the Constitution was merely a collection of wise sayings, and it would only gain sway if it were widely accepted. Tradition's stewards sought to fulfill their duties with a deep sense of empathy for the nation's crisis and an understanding of the importance of not abusing their authority in the eyes of the general public. They feared that if they acted in a way that did not bring them joy, they would be seen as hypocrites by the rest of the world, like the First and Second Continental Congresses. Part 8, Essays 41 through 44. This proposed government system had to be considered as taking into account the amount of force it possesses and the manner it is organized. Critics argued that the new form of government had an excessive amount of force, but they overlooked the fact that any legislature that aims to benefit everyone must have some misuse of power. Forceful protection against remote threats is provided by the suggested government structure. That's not all, it's also an essential part of the United States' national identity. Everyone will agree that this level of power must be conceded. Keeping up in both peace and conflict is a problem that has been discussed elsewhere. The most effective strategy to avoid the deployment of soldiers during periods of peace is to prevent any potential threat country from taking the same steps. In any event, history has shown that the general population's freedoms can be harmed by the presence of military troops. Security will be provided by countries who have a clear understanding of the dangers they face. Due to the distance from other European countries, the suggested government setup was able to accomplish this. Such assurances would not have been possible if the United States had been divided. In addition, the ability to levy and collect taxes is fundamental. The capacity to levy taxes on goods imported from other countries generates a substantial amount of revenue for the government. In any case, when the population of the United States grows and begins to produce its own unique goods, this metric of income will alter. Imports are reduced when a country meets its own specific needs rather than importing a wide range of goods. It is also given to the central government the capability of establishing ties with distant armies. In order for the United States to be considered a country in any respect, it must accept other countries' methods that are uniform and tightly controlled from the outside. The Constitution strengthened the central government's ability to combat robberies and lawful offenses on the oceans because the articles did not specify how to deal with transgressions against the laws of countries. In 1808, a clause in the Constitution was adopted to put an end to the slave trade. Due to this, the suggested government structure has an immense advantage over the current system, which is riddled with obnoxious practices such as these. Two reasons were given by critics to limit the scope of this proviso. Because both of these things are true, it's clear that the Constitution is being used to restrict people from moving from Europe to the United States. Further reasons for Congress's actions are provided by the author. Part 9, Essays 45 and 51. The relationship between the national and state governments benefits the states. State governments benefit from the national government's protection, concessions of power, and the general population's additional support while dealing with their neighbors. Without state governments, the federal government would be unable to function. The President of the United States and the senators of each state are selected by the state legislatures. All of the federal government's branches are reliant on and resentful of the state governments for their supply routes. When it comes to state governments, people choose those that are closer to home and where they have family or friends. There is a balance of power between elected and state governments. In light of the fact that state governments are more connected to the general populace, and the federal government relies on them for making decisions, state governments have the upper hand. As a result of this proposed form of government, the political notion that the executive, judicial, and legislative branches should be independent is damaged. As a result of this, the Constitution may have evolved into a single body possessing all the powers and trampling on the people's rights, which would have been a serious problem. As a result, each of the state constitutions puts up a little ambiguous division of power. Not a single instance has occurred where every branch has been completely isolated. In any case, it is critical that each branch of the administration have some amount of authority over the others in a blended administration. The experience of both Virginia and Pennsylvania has shown that segregating commitments between branches does not protect every branch from the weight of the other branches, as most American constitutions have imagined. Forces can't be kept in one body's hands by a well-composed division of labor. However, there are multiple reasons why this would have been dangerous to the government itself, and the general public should not have been the final arbiter. Every time the general public is urged to help correct the government's mistakes, it shows a flaw in the legislative and diminishes public respect for the administration. Intending to irritate others by pursuing the general consensus carries a significant amount of risk. An open-ended query to the broader populace is unlikely to modify the unevenness that has already occurred. The vast majority of outside solutions for resolving a rift between the branches of the government are ineffective. As a result, It is critical to form the legislative body in such a way that all branches of government are held to their proper place. Each branch should have its own will and have as little to do with the arrangement of persons from other branches as is realistically expected. The larger the society, the more likely it is that it will be able to govern itself effectively. A large Republican government will be accommodated by the adjustments and blending of government thoughts inherent in the United States Constitution, which ensures people's rights while promoting the general welfare. Alexander Hamilton was a prominent American statesman and the major author of the Federalist Papers, which advocated for a strong central government and responsible budgetary policies. The West Indian island of Nevis is the place where Hamilton was born in 1755. He was the son of a Scottish trader, James Hamilton, by an unmarried woman. While still a student at King's College, now Columbia University, Hamilton began writing two pamphlets that were published in 1774 and 1775 and became well known. This was the beginning of his political career. Hamilton tied the knot with New York heiress Elizabeth Schuyler in 1780. Hamilton returned to school in Albany after the war and enrolled in the law school there. After serving in Congress for 2 terms, 1782–83, he returned to the legal profession and rose to prominence as one of New York City's most successful attorneys. As part of his efforts to get the Constitution ratified, Hamilton published a collection of writings known as the Federalist Papers. Secretary of Treasury under President Washington was Hamilton in 1789. As a result of Hamilton's innovations, the U.S. government is still influenced by them today. With equal numbers of electoral college votes, the 1800 presidential election between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr became extremely contentious. Hamilton, who was then a major commander in the army, sided with Jefferson and played a key role in Jefferson's victory over Burr. Burr reacted angrily, and he issued a challenge to Hamilton for a duel. Dueling was a no-no for Hamilton, but he was forced to accept and the two met at Weehawken, New Jersey, on July 11, 1804. Hamilton suffered a fatal wound during the battle and died the following day. It is still possible to visit the Grange National Memorial, Hamilton's country home, in New York City. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.